Welcome back to part 2 of our 3-part series, where we continue exploring the world of medicine through the lens of top experts. Let's dive in our research. So let's get on to the biomarkers a little bit, because your research has uncovered significant gender and ethnicity differences in the development of cardiovascular disease. And you recently published a study entitled Large-Scale Plasma Proteomics Identifies Novel Proteins and Protein Networks Associated with the Development of Heart Failure. Tell us about those novel proteins. Actually, also talk a little bit about BMP and the impact that this discovery could have on implementing clinical practice.
Yeah, I'm happy to. And, this is actually a quite interesting story. So 40 years ago, a Canadian researcher named De Bold discovered the natriuretic peptide. So that was basically the first cardiac biomarker that was discovered. And, today we can measure thousands of proteins in the blood by using proteomic platforms. So we can, in this study, we measured 5,000 proteins, including the natriuretic peptides or BNP, and we assessed the risk of developing heart failure. So just like we talked about, this was both a cohort early in life and a cohort later in life, and we looked at among those who did not have heart failure or actually not have any cardiovascular disease at all, which biomarker was the best at predicting the development of heart failure later in life. And among all those 5,000 biomarkers, good old BNP beat them all. It was by far the strongest predictor of developing heart failure. So, it's interesting that the first biomarker they found still is the most clinically relevant, and we demonstrated that as well. While using BNP, there are things that we have to consider, as you alluded to, specifically the associations with age, with sex, and with ethnicity. So we know that age is associated with higher levels. So the higher, the older you are, the higher your natriuretic peptide levels are. So that's something we have to keep in mind, and that means we have to use different thresholds for an older person compared to a younger person. What we have identified also is that there are actually quite substantial differences related to sex and race. And it's actually inverse to compare to what people think, because we have to keep in mind that these natriuretic peptides are not elevated because it's a bad biomarker or it's a bad guy. The biomarker natriuretic peptide is actually doing a lot of beneficial things. So natriuretic peptides are elevated because they try to compensate for a lot of maladaptive processes that are happening. So the activation of the renin-angiotensin system, the effect on the kidneys, all of this is counteracted by the natriuretic peptides. So having high natriuretic peptide levels is a marker of something bad happening to your heart or cardiac stress, but it's actually, the biomarker itself is actually doing a lot of beneficial things to your body. So what we found was that women have higher levels of natriuretic peptides compared to men. And we also found that white individuals had higher levels compared to black individuals. And that is interesting because when we look at the risk associated with heart failure, it's opposite. So men have a higher risk than women, and black individuals have a higher risk than white individuals. And then the absolute risk associated with a certain threshold actually becomes quite large. So if you take, for example, NT-proBNP of 100 for a white woman, that does not confer a high risk at all, because she most likely has a higher NT-proBNP level, and she also has a low risk of heart failure. So for her, having 100 NT-proBNP is probably completely fine. For a black man, on the other side, he both has inherently a lower natriuretic peptide level and is also at a higher heart failure risk. So for a black man, that same level can confer up to actually in one cohort, up to a 7-fold higher risk of heart failure.
Good.
So taking these sex and ethnicity differences into account is actually quite important when we use these biomarkers.
Wow, that's stunning. Has anything been done to take that data and translate it into lay language so that communities. When I was in the United States, one of the things, and I was practicing in an area that had within a, as is typical in America, within a few miles, you had the wealthiest of the wealthy and the most privileged of the privileged, and you had the poorest of the poor. And we started some initiatives going out to community churches and community centers to try and develop education programs and help bring those people who otherwise wouldn't become patients because they don't access the medical system. So, sorry, a bit of a long-winded question. Are you taking this, because this is, it's fascinating. Do people know about this within various communities?
Yes, so no, there are when you measure antiprotein P at your hospital or local laboratory, you will get levels or thresholds that are adjusted to age, but they're very rarely adjusted for the sex and ethnicity differences, and that could easily be implemented so that the number becomes red at a different threshold for a white woman compared to a black man, for example, which are the two extremes.
What? Why do hospitals not? Is it sort of a political correctness thing that you?
I don't think so. Part of the reason is that once patients actually have developed heart failure, their NT-proBNP levels are very high because they're in full blown heart failure. Then these things matter much less, almost nothing. So it's very relevant when we're talking assessing the risk of heart failure and even diagnosing heart failure. But the more severe the heart failure becomes, the less important these factors are. So it may be that many look at these biomarkers in the hospital setting, but it's important, and I think they should be implemented when we use it in the primary care setting or in the before the severe stages.
Oh, fascinating. So,
Mhm.
as the leader of Nor Trials Cardiovascular, you're at the forefront of a government-supported initiative aimed at increasing Norwegian participation in clinical trials in cardiology in collaborations with hospitals across the country. Talk to us about ways in which cardiovascular disease may have some unique aspects in your country. I mean, we do know that there are national characteristics that do or do not expose someone to a higher risk of certain diseases. And so, tell us some of the biggest challenges also in boosting trial participation and how you see this initiative shaping the future of cardiovascular treatment in your country.
Yeah, thank you. So this initiative is really something fantastic that came all the way from the top of the government, which is basically to support a stronger collaboration between industry, which many look bad upon, and us in academia or in hospitals. And I think this is a very it's a relationship that we need to have because the industry are moving the forefront of development of medicine. They're developing the majority of the new treatments, etc. But they need to find the patients, and the patients are with us in the hospitals. So we need to have a collaboration, and it needs to be healthy and regulated. And I think this is what the NOR trials, so Norway trials organization, is trying to support. Yeah, and for many years, the trial participation in Western countries have been going down for many reasons, and I think part of it is because the complexity of the trials are increasing. It takes a lot of effort to be part of clinical trials today. Secondly, the clinical demand is increasing upon all clinicians. I think it's not specific to Norway, but most countries. And also, but I think finally also that there's been a lot of awareness around the collaboration with industry after it being quite a Texas situation 10 or 20 years ago with the unhealthy relationship with industry. So this Nortrials initiative is trying to support a healthy relationship where we do enroll Norwegian patients into multinational large trials sponsored by industry in order to provide better care and develop new treatments for patients, which is the overreaching goal. So I think this is a great initiative, and we've received so much support from the hospitals in Norway, and it's been a great journey so far. We've been doing it for 3 years, and we're gonna continue to build this.
And well, thanks for that. And obviously, it makes perfect sense. And you don't want confounders like who's participating to impact the results. And for FDA, I know, are very, very diligent about looking at trial participation. You know, where people come from. Actually, years ago, I was involved in a clinical trial, and the organization was endeavoring to get clearance in Europe, and the clinical trial work had been done in Australia. There was a center in Russia. There were centers in Canada, and there were centers in the United States. And the European regulators said, well, there are no Europeans. It was like, yes, but look where these people are from. And if you look at the demographic division between people of various, African origin, Oriental origin, Northern European origin, you do research in Minnesota and you'll see a lot of people who look and sound like you, Peder.
Yeah, I know.
But tell me about what another part of my question was, ways in which cardiovascular disease in your country are unique. I mean, are the differences in incidence, in severity, in
Yeah, so the way in Norway is kind of unique is that actually the risk of developing cardiovascular disease is low. So it's actually a very low risk country, which makes it different from higher risk countries. Obviously, there's a very long life expectancy in Norway, and the risk of developing cardiovascular disease have been plummeting the recent years. So that's kind of what's unique with Norway. But I would rather, if instead of saying that we are unique and you need to enroll Norwegians, I would rather say that we in Norway should be participating in global clinical trials. We need to contribute to these as much as other countries in order to have these trials successfully conducted.
And that's a wrap on part 2. Thanks for tuning in. Don't miss the third and final episode where we conclude this deep dive series.